This is an LMC Media Community Conversation. I'm Maura Carlin. I'm joined by Village of Mamaroneck Mayor Tom Murphy and Trustee Lou Young. And I'm going to start with Lou because, Lou, you were recently appointed by the mayor to fill a vacant seat on the Village Board of Trustees. You stated you intend to run for the seat next fall, but let me just say that for those who don't know you, you're a retired veteran TV reporter who covered the New York City metro area for decades, we'll leave it at that, on a variety of local networks. Mm-hmm. Is this your first foray into local government and municipal governance?
Yes, I mean, because they're mutually exclusive. You can't be in politics and be on in journalism at the same time. It's just not compatible. Not that I could not be impartial, but the appearance of impropriety is always suggested, and it's just best to avoid it. So I cannot engage in any of those activities while I perform this service.
So what are the key issues that motivated you? What are you most concerned about, or what's on your agenda for the Village of Mamaroneck?
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, I first came to Mamaroneck during a flood. I think it was in the 80s, 30 years ago. Wasn't a big flood, wasn't one of the big ones, but it was a flood. And back then they said, you know, we've got a plan to deal with this. And then I came back a few years later and, you know, I got the same sound bites. And years after that, and, you know, and the same thing happened. Then, without ever putting it together, we lived in Larchmont for 20 years and downsized. And I didn't want to leave the area. So we moved to Mamaroneck. And I like Mamaroneck because it's a little more diverse, and it's got the Mamaroneck Avenue strip there, and you can walk to the train station, and we're renting in Washingtonville, and I like it a lot. And then it flooded, and then a couple of weeks later it flooded again, and this time very seriously. And I thought, what happened to the plan? And I realized what I was seeing was decades of inattention and neglect, and I wanted to step in. I don't think.
So now it's
now
it's a turn for the mayor, because we are going to talk about water. I have been covering Mamaroneck water for a long time, and I've heard the Village of Mamaroneck described as the New Orleans of Westchester. Do you agree, Tom?
Well, it's a moniker we'd like to lose. I agree that, you know, we have very severe flooding, but you know what has always saved us, Maura, from the fate that New Orleans has, is that when we do have these catastrophes, the men and women of our volunteer fire department and our police department and our EMS all stay on the job, do their duty, risk life and limb to keep our residents safe. And I do believe that, you know, we have that potential. You know, we've dodged a few bullets in the past two floods to have not lost anybody in the Village of Mamaroneck, but we should not be putting our emergency responders in that situation constantly. You know, we shouldn't have to ask them to constantly risk their lives. So that's why I'm so thrilled that Senator Schumer and our elected representatives in Washington, Senator Gillibrand and Congressman Bowman, and our state assembly people and our Westchester County representatives have worked in tandem with us to fight for and to get us the $88 million of the Army Corps plan. And I'm really looking forward to that. And while it will not cure all the problems, it's a really good first start, and it'll definitely lessen the intensity, and it could stop some floods.
So that plan's been in the works for a long time.
Yes.
They started on it decades ago, but they were last here, I think, in 2017. Is that right? Trying to finalize it and start working on the funding until it was pulled at the last second.
That plan was started after the 2007 flood. April 15, 2007 was a huge flood. Nita Lowey, when she was our congressperson, was the impetus in Congress to get the study done. The study took like 7 or 8 years. It was finally done. It was ready to go. It was ready to be implemented, and it was killed by Donald Trump's administration about 2018 to 2019. I don't remember the exact time, but it was a decision of the Trump White House to kill that plan. And had it not been killed, there would have been some sort of a beginning started when we had the floods this year.
If
So
you'll
with
recall,
it,
if you'll recall, Tama, I gave you the bad news on that.
Yes.
Remember? Yeah,
We
yeah.
did.
We were working. I had been working on that still when I was a reporter, and then
Yeah.
had been working with Catherine Parker on some projects, and had it as a control date, and found out it was pulled, and I was like, what? And Catherine told me immediately, call Tom, and that's how Tom and I met.
Yep.
Hmm.
And
Well-
the rest is Mamaroneck history now.
so
And
with the funding,
I sent out an email titled "Trump to Mamaroneck, drop dead."
Yeah.
so with the funding now in place and the Army Corps of Engineers on board, what's the next step?
The next step, I believe, is they're going to finalize plans, put the work out to bid. I think they're going to start with changes to the Ward Avenue Bridge in Mamaroneck, and
Now-
it's going to take a few years to do the plan.
Now, a few years ago, when there were discussions about this, and I actually spoke to Army Corps people as well as village administrator and people on various committees in the village. And the plan that was in place that was put forth, it was essentially a placeholder with details to be worked out later.
That's
like
correct.
easements, bridges, numbers of homes to be raised or suggested to be, things like that. Is that still the case?
Yes, we're doing that plan. You know, there will be some changes to it. There'll be some modifications to it. But the reason we were able to get the $88 million was because in the Ida recovery bill, Senator Schumer put in a clause that if there were Army Corps of Engineer plans already approved that hadn't been funded, that bill would fund them. So that plan gets funded, but also what that did was it alleviated the villages of Mamaroneck's financial responsibility for the plan. Now, we were on the hook for, I think, like $9 million originally, and now we don't have a financial responsibility.
So what can people expect to be learning, whether there's going to be an easement on their property, whether their home should be raised, which bridges, what should people be expecting to hear, and how should they expect to hear it?
If your property is going to be affected, you'll definitely hear from the Army Corps. You know, that won't be for a while. The Ward Avenue Bridge doesn't affect anybody's property right now. I think that they want to give people time to make arrangements. Obviously, if we have to take pieces of your property, there's very few properties that we'll have to take in toto. Some properties, you know, they'd be slicing up part of the backyard. They'd be, you know, compensated at a fair price. You know, that's part of the deal too. So it's not just, you know, not a fair deal. You know, we're going to do it fairly. But you know, this is a plan that's going to protect the lives of many of us. Every time the downtown gets flooded in this catastrophe, even if you don't live down there, it affects you because it affects the whole community.
Which includes Larchmont and the school district.
Yes.
The ACE, or Army Corps of Engineer plan, doesn't affect groundwater flooding, bubbling up, just the flooding of the Mamaroneck and Sheldrake rivers. How, if at all, will that be addressed?
I'm not sure what you mean there. Groundwater.
Well, there, you know, Mamaroneck's on I guess, what is it called, an aquifer?
Mm-hmm.
And there's water that bubbles up from the surface, not just from the flooding of the rivers.
Well, what you should know more is that when this flood happens, I mean, it happens several different ways. And having seen it flood, I now know there's no putting sandbags up and keeping the river back. That's one way it happens. The water just comes up out of the ground and out of the drainage.
That's part of what I was talking about.
It just rises, yes. So and it's all part of the same thing, and then it fills the rivers and all that. That's why all this talk about and it would be helpful river gauges. You know, the river gauges are great, but they're essentially going to tell you, look down, your feet are wet, we're in a flood. So the problem is to get the water out of here, get it out, regardless of how it shows up. And I don't think that it precludes groundwater flooding. I don't think it can. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tom.
No, I think you're right, Lou, but I think that what happens too is in some of the low-lying areas, the rivers get so high that the storm drains, the river's level is above the storm drain. So the
Mhm.
storm drain is not gonna, it's not gonna force through into the river if the river has more pressure coming the other way. But Lou's right, and you're both right. There's an aquifer in Washingtonville that's high, and the ground is wet already, and there's less percolation. But what we have to work on next is, and this is a long-term plan, is getting communities upstream to have some responsibility for the water
Oh.
that they're dumping on us.
Before we run out of time, Lou, I understand you're involved in an ad hoc committee. Which one is that?
Ad hoc committee, the name of it, it's always been in flux, but it's an ad hoc committee on flood stories and on opening up lines of communication with people in the flood zone. There was an attempt by the village to open up a public relations channel with those folks to go to ways that was not funded. So the mayor thought that we should open those channels ourselves. So what we've done is we're going to doing a door-to-door survey, and we're going to get information and find out from them what their experience has been, not just with this flood, but ongoing floods. And then we can let them know what we're doing both ways. So it's two-way communication. It's not like we're going to make a plan and just tell people what's happening. Am I right, Mayor?
No, you're right. That is definitely one part of it. The other part of it is that these people have compelling, sad, tragic, but hopeful stories. And as we go forward, and if there isn't another flood, and hope to God there isn't another flood in the near future, but if there isn't another flood in the next few years, human beings have a tendency to forget. They have a tendency to, if something happened, why are we doing that now? Because it hasn't happened. And, so we want to memorialize these stories, and we want to put a human face on flooding. And because when the construction starts, it's going to be about money being spent and aesthetic appearances and why you're doing this. But we have to keep reminding people, this is about people's lives. This is about people who are constantly in a state of stress and trauma by what happened to them many, many times with these floods. And we have to protect their lives, we have to protect their properties, and they have as much an expectation of comfort and happiness in their homes as anyone. And
So you will be documenting flooding
Yes.
in Mamaroneck and how it's affected everyone. I want to thank you,
in a lot of
gentlemen.
ways. In a lot of ways, more it's like what I used to do. Except I'll be doing it. You got me cheap there, Tom.
How can people sign up if they want to be involved?
We'll have there's a little what's that code called at the
QR code?
QR code.
QCR, I don't know.
Yeah. And there'll be posters. They'll be able to scan it. They'll be able to fill it out and send all the information in. I mean, I when I started this, I thought, well, we'll go around with clipboards, and then the young people are like,
come on, you were going to have a camera.
No, Grandpa, that's not how we do it.
What's a clipboard? Yeah.
And I want to tell you this more. I told Tom the same thing. This is akin for the community. It's going to be getting like getting a double knee replacement. It's not going to be fun. It's going to be aesthetically unpleasant. It's going to hurt. But if you don't do it, you're not going to be able to walk.
Right, exactly.
I want to thank you, gentlemen, for joining us, and we'll be hearing from you more about flood mitigation and the Army Corps of Engineer project. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Take care, Lou. Take care, Maura.